Welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Staff Training and Research Institute of Distance Education, STRIDE, Master's Degree Programs, Master of Arts, Distance Education, MADE, First Year. MDE 414 Management of Distance Education. Block 4 Planning and Management of ODL Institutions Case Studies.
Unit 2 Promotion and Coordination of Distance Education in the Country. 2.1 Introduction. As the 20th century drew to a close, the nature and purpose of the education discourse went through significant changes. Higher education was no longer an elitist pursuit, it was mass education. Most of the developed countries registered enrollment levels of 50% or more of the relevant age group in their higher education institutions. Most of the developing countries were on the threshold of double-digit levels, while the least developed nations were still struggling to reach any respectable level. As educational provision expanded, so did the social demand. Questions of access, cost and quality were at the center of the discourse. The impact of technology on widening access, reducing cost and improving the quality of the educational provision dominated the ongoing debate on policies, strategies and resources that determined the nature and type of the provision. Open and distance learning had become an integral part of the education landscape. If the latter half of the 20th century promised a prominent place for open universities across the world, views towards greater convergence of the traditional mode and the distance mode of delivery began to emerge as the new century dawned. Strong arguments in favor of dedicated open universities yielded place in favor of dual-mode institutions that combined conventional and distance modes of delivery to reach out to larger numbers. The role of technology in making this possible was widely recognized. The focus of the new discourse was on inclusive education, ensuring access, equity and justice at an affordable cost and ensuring that the quality of education was of the highest level. Though national policies and development strategies favored an integrated approach to education combining all modes of delivery, the planning and management systems of distance education are considerably different from those of conventional education. While technologies are common to both, the organization of the development and delivery systems had distinctively different approaches and management styles. Depending upon the size, diversity and the scale of operations, specialized structures and organizational mechanisms are conceived and developed in appropriate contexts and circumstances. The major focus of this block is the planning and management of distance education in India. As you will have noticed, India has a major national open university and as many as 14 state open universities. There are, in addition, over 200 conventional universities that offer distance education programs. About 25% of the 14 million students enrolled in higher education in India are pursuing their studies through distance education. It was in anticipation of this massive growth that those who designed the Open University and distance education system and its management in India also thought about a special agency for the promotion and coordination of distance education in the country. To put the whole issue in perspective, we can do no better than quote the then Indian Education Minister who piloted the IGNOU legislation in Parliament. He said, "We would like the Open University to grow at this stage on its own, with full freedom, because it would be better to allow this new plant to grow into the sunlight, as it will. I think at this stage we do not link it too closely with established institutions. Let it evolve its own practices, its own traditions, its own values. That may be better for an open system like this because, after all, every institution gets conditioned by its own experiences and we would like this university to be completely free of the conditioning of all other institutions. We should let the Open University grow on its own and help in the development of other open universities which will come up as well as the correspondence courses which are being run by certain universities." In Unit 1, we briefly touched upon the role of IGNOU as a system leader. 1.4.4. The uniqueness of this role lies in the acceptance of the reality that a vast country like India with as many as 28 states and 18 recognized regional languages besides English and Hindi would not be served adequately by a single national open University. In that event, it was assumed that the National Open University could also perform the role of a promoter and coordinator by sharing academic and other resources with its counterparts in the states. We have mentioned in some detail the policy perspectives and strategic considerations that prompted the designation of IGNOU as the apex body for the promotion and coordination of open and distance learning in India. In what follows in this unit, we shall try to look at the ways in which IGNOU went about performing this role and where we stand at present with regard to regulation of open and distance learning. 2.2 Objectives. After studying this unit, you should be able to analyze and appreciate the contexts and the circumstances in which it would be useful and necessary to create independent agencies to promote and coordinate the growth and development of distance education within the national systems of higher education and its standard setting. Design and develop appropriate models and structures that can effectively contribute to the growth and development of distance education in the given contexts and circumstances. Critically examine the IGNOU model that combines the roles of an education provider and an apex body for promotion and coordination of an education system, and consider what models would be useful if a separate mechanism needs to be set up at the national level for promoting and coordinating the development of the open university and distance education systems. 2.3 The evolution of the IGNOU model. You will recall that in Unit 1, we discussed extensively the circumstances in which open university and distance education systems emerged in India, considering the federal nature of the country and the large number of states that constituted the union, the diversity of major linguistic groups and above all, the large numbers of people who spoke different languages within the same state. It was obvious that a single open university operating at the national level cannot meet all the diverse needs of India's population. Establishment of separate state-level open universities in all major states was foreseen from the beginning. Indeed, it was one of the states, Andhra Pradesh, that established the first dedicated open university in India, a good 3 years before the national university was launched. The views of the planners and policymakers at that time were firmly in favor of several state open universities because of the multiplicity of languages and the inconceivably large numbers of people to be reached. The Central Advisory Board of Education, a body that advises central and state government on policies, was in favor of a coordination council for open universities to promote their coordinated development through sharing of academic and physical resources. The CAB had, in fact, conceived of a networked system comprising several state open universities to avoid duplication of efforts, on the one hand, and optimum utilization of available resources while ensuring a high level in the quality of the programs. On the other, perhaps this vision was a little too idealistic and did not take into account the practical difficulties in translating it into an effective working model. We shall examine the reasons for the hesitant start in giving effect to this model in the following section. Meanwhile, the legislation of IGNOU was in place. It clearly said that it shall be the duty of the university to take such steps as it may deem fit for the promotion of the open university and distance education system and for the determination of standards of teaching, evaluation and research in such systems, and for the purpose of performing this function, the university shall have such powers, including the power to allocate and disburse grants to colleges or any other university or institution of higher learning. In simple terms, it meant that IGNOU is mandated to promote the open university system in India. The university has the responsibility to determine and maintain the standards of teaching, research and evaluation in the open university system, and in the performance of these functions, the university can provide development funding to other universities and institutions. It may be noted here that during the past few years, the above functions of IGNOU have been curtailed such that the university takes care of its own operations and has forfeited the coordination and funding functions mandated to it by its act passed in the Parliament. 2.3.1 The conceptual design. The proposal to establish an open university took concrete shape at a time when there was growing disenchantment with the ways in which the university and higher education system was functioning in India. The system of higher education was already very large, but its spread had been extremely uneven. The facilities available with individual universities varied very widely. The courses offered by most universities had not been revised or renewed to meet the demand of the times, and, therefore, their relevance and utility were being questioned. The University Grants Commission, responsible for development of universities, was not able to do much as funding for higher education was continuously declining. It is against this background that the search for an alternative system for the provision of educational opportunities began and the decision to establish an open university was taken. The model of a UGC-type organization was not favored for the open learning system for several reasons. The most important among them were organizations like the UGC turn out to be mere funding agencies and therefore, their approach tends to be bureaucratic. They do not provide any significant academic direction and leadership. Overwhelmed with the burden of supporting over 200 universities and 8,000 colleges, that was in 1985, in 2018, there are over 600 universities and about 30,000 colleges. The UGC could not be expected to do justice in nurturing a fledgling open university system. Unlike the traditional universities which confined themselves to classroom teaching, open universities depend more on learning packages and services that are openly accessible. The open universities are not inhibited by considerations of autonomy in matters like curriculum transaction, course combinations, program design, etc. The most important development input for an open university is the learning packages. Since there would be more than one open university in India, it is necessary that these are shared in different forms rather than each university preparing its own packages independently. If these considerations were to inform the efforts at promotion and coordination, the most effective instrument for that purpose would be a networked system in which every participant is a partner and a stakeholder, and IGNOU, because of its national character and also its significant resource base, could lead the networked system as the promoter and coordinator. Check your progress 1. Note: I, space is given below for your answer. E. Compare your answer with the one given at the end of this unit. Why UGC was not favored to lead the open university network in the country? Answer in about 40 words. .3.2 The initial reservations. We just mentioned that the decision to keep the National Open University outside the purview of the University Grants Commission was prompted by two major considerations. 1. To let the Open University grow unaffected by the conditioning of the traditional system, and 2. To help it evolve its own processes, norms, and standards. Since its establishment in 1956, the UGC exercised unfettered freedom on the standard-setting functions over all universities in the country. The agricultural universities were an exception. To keep the Open University out of its supervisory responsibility would, it was argued, erode the authority of the UGC. As a number of universities in the country were already offering correspondence education programs with support from the UGC, it would now become imperative for those universities to look for support from new sources. On the whole, the protagonists of the UGC were apprehensive that the move would seriously undermine the authority and effectiveness of the UGC as the custodian of the standard-setting responsibility in higher education. Open University was certainly a new experiment. But it had to be established, developed and run by people who were not conditioned by the traditional system. The impact of the UGC and its ways of standard setting was so deep in their outlook and attitudes that they were not easily persuaded to take up the challenge. They began to express apprehensions about the relationships between IGNOU and other open universities and about the efficacy of one university sitting in judgment over the quality and standards of the academic programs of another, the player and referee syndrome. The whole concept, it was argued, was contrary to the time-tested principle of university autonomy, and most universities in the country would find it incongruous that they have to be guided, and possibly nurtured, by another university. The senior management of the IGNOU itself began to feel the pressure of this argument, coming as it did from its own peer groups. In the traditional system, the only known model for development funding was the UGC model, and over the years, the UGC-university relationships evolved at best as a patron-client relationship. The perils of one university becoming the patron of other universities were indeed perceptible in the initial stages, making the operationalization of the whole concept cautious, hesitant and even indecisive. On the other hand, the concept of a networked system of open universities sharing programs, courses and delivery systems and resources had its strong supporters. 2. They were convinced that there was no need for each open university to develop and produce its own course materials. These could be easily shared among them, and the cost would be considerably less if state universities adopted and translated available materials into their own languages and made it possible for larger number of students to enroll and pursue programs of their choice. Such an approach, it was argued, would make student mobility possible between programs, institutions and regions. The core philosophy of flexible, modular, and open learning systems demanded such an approach. More importantly, the technology infrastructure needed for delivery of programs required huge investments, and it would be unrealistic to expect each university to create its own technology infrastructure when a number of them could draw upon the central facilities created at huge costs. And finally, the view that the open university system should develop as a partnership among universities that shared common objectives, a common pool of programs and courses and common delivery systems prevailed. 2.3.3 The mechanism takes shape. All these took protracted discussions among the open universities that were already functioning. The National Board of Accreditation, NBA, set up by the AICTE in 1990, accredits technical institutions, those offering programs in engineering, management and allied fields. The National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAAC, set up by the UGC in 1994, accredits universities and colleges of general education. In both cases, accreditation is voluntary, and by 2010, just about 25% of all existing institutions have sought and secured accreditation. A bill to make accreditation mandatory for all institutions of higher education is currently before Parliament. Neither the NBA nor NAAC is currently considering ODL institutions for accreditation. It was into this vacuum that DEC had entered and started preparatory work to assume this responsibility. Accreditation by DEC would be both of programs as well as of institutions. The framework of reference for institutional accreditation includes performance indicators and benchmark statements, supported by evidence on specific parameters like program design and development, program transaction and delivery, student assessment and evaluation, learner support services and progression, infrastructure and learning resources, governance structure and leadership, internal quality assurance processes, and so on. The program accreditation processes focus on criteria like infrastructure and human resource capabilities, academic programs and learning resources, learning support services, research and consultancy, governance and innovative practices. While all these preparations are being completed, a new legislation that seeks to make accreditation mandatory for all higher education institutions and for each of their programs is underway. This DEC initiative, therefore, might have to conform to the provisions of the Act when it comes into force. DEC's engagement with regulation was certainly not at the cost of its responsibility for development. It continued to provide funding support for the implementation of the initiatives taken during the initial phase. During the period from 2002 to 2009, DEC provided development funding to 13 state open universities. Most of them started operations around this period, totaling over 1,165 million rupees. It also supported the conventional universities to upgrade their correspondence programs to mainstream distance education offerings with funding support of over 355 million rupees. DEC continued its engagement with the promotion of other early initiatives like professional development of distance education personnel, capacity building, quality assurance, systems research, etc., with renewed vigor. 2.6 The impact of DEC. Having discussed at some length the concept, composition, functions and responsibilities of the Distance Education Council as it has gone about the performance of its role, it is now time to ask what impact it has made on the distance education system in India, and to consider whether the DEC model is worthy of emulation elsewhere. Our purpose here is not to undertake a critical analysis of the working of DEC or to engage in any value judgment on its success or failure. We are more concerned with this mechanism as a sustainable model for the promotion, development and standard setting in the open university and distance education systems. In the last 3 or 4 decades, a large number of developing countries have established open university and distance education systems to augment their educational provision. In most cases, the initiative was taken by the governments. The ministries, departments dealing with education assumed the responsibility, not just for making national policies on distance education provision, but also in the execution of those policies. Unlike the case of conventional schools and universities, distance education provision required the involvement of more national level agencies. It needed, besides the education departments, the active support and involvement of those at the national level dealing with the broadcast media, like radio and television, the telecommunication authorities dealing with the internet and connectivity, and not the least the private sector engaged in the telecom industry and distribution channels providing access to broadcast media. As these elements were critical to the implementation of an effective distance education system, the role of national policies in these fields and their coordinated implementation assumes importance, depending upon the environmental factors, like the size of the system, its scale of operations, the diversity of programs, the number of institutions involved, and above all the national system itself, federal or unitary, population size and linguistic diversity. Each system evolves its own structures and processes. What is important, however, is to know that there is no one system that suits all needs and situations. India, as you all know, is a big country with 1.3 billion people, scattered across 28 states and 7 union territories, speaking 18 recognized national, regional languages, some of which are the official languages of the states concerned, and as many as several thousand dialects. In this complex mix of languages, religions, tribal identities and cultural diversity, there is no simple or single method to reach out to all the people of India. There are geographical diversities too. Unreachable hilly tracts, deep and dense forest areas, small islands, and vast deserts. Responding to these diversities is indeed a challenge that distance education planners in India have to face. Perhaps, no other country in the world compares with India in all these dimensions at the same time. The Indian experience, therefore, may not be fully relevant to all other developing countries. Yet, there are lessons to be learned from the Indian experience, not just in developing models and systems in the planning and management of distance education, but in avoiding costly mistakes and expensive experiments. 2.6.1 What did DEC achieve? Without any doubt, the most important achievement of DEC was its successful effort in placing distance education firmly in the higher education landscape of India. While IGNOU looms large as the world's largest open university with its 3 million plus students, and DEC operating in its shadow, one might well ask whether DEC did fulfill the responsibility placed on it. The answer is a resounding yes. Without DEC, IGNOU could not have become a truly national open university leading the promotion and development of the open university and distance learning system in the country. With its national character, access to major national resources and its potentially huge intellectual capital, the IGNOU was able in a short time to establish its footprints across the country. But it Should not be forgotten that as many as 14 state open universities across the country are supplementing IGNOU's efforts in reaching out to regions as well as language and population groups that IGNOU would not have been able to serve. A significant proportion of the distance education enrollment is accounted for by the state open universities and directorates of distance education of conventional universities. That DEC was instrumental in mediating the creation of a network and sharing resources, especially course materials, was no mean achievement. The efforts at establishing norms and standards for programs, setting out quality assurance systems and processes, training for the professional development of distance education practitioners across the country, promotion of awareness about distance education methods and practices through nationwide conferences, seminars and workshops have all contributed significantly to the acceptance of distance education as a credible and effective alternative to conventional education. If IGNOU were to take these responsibilities on itself, perhaps it could not have achieved as much. Firstly, it would have diverted its attention from its core responsibility of developing programs and courses, enrolling students, delivering various services to them including the assessment of their performance and awarding qualifications. Secondly, as a university, it would have been too much to expect IGNOU to bring together all the state open universities as a closely knit network without any conflicts of interest. It would not have been easy for a university to iron out tensions of different kinds arising from perceptions of academic autonomy, quality and standards of learning packages, delivery of services, etc. Thirdly, the presence of a mediator, in the form of DEC that represented all the stakeholders, played its role objectively and effectively, both as a promoter and facilitator. And finally, as the coordinating body for distance education at the national level, it was possible for DEC to articulate a vision for the development of the system across all the states and union territories, and formulate the strategies and measures for translating that vision into reality. 2.6. The 2nd of December, an assessment. As we noted earlier in this unit, the establishment of DEC was prompted by the consideration that a new and sensitive instrument like the Open University system should be permitted to grow on its own momentum, without being conditioned by the approach and outlook of the conventional mode of education. It was anticipated that both in terms of the number of institutions and enrollment, the distance education system would occupy a critical position in augmenting the provision of educational opportunities. The experience of correspondence education offered by the conventional universities was none too inspiring, and the continuance of the Open University system under the supervision of UGC would not have offered it enough space for unfettered growth. This is not to suggest that UGC has been indifferent to the growth of the distance education system, burdened as it is with a very large system comprising nearly 600 universities and about 30,000 colleges. In 2018, UGC would not have been able to do full justice in nursing the new system to realize its full potential. It was the expectation that a dedicated agency might perform that role. Students of distance education engaged in studying the Indian experience need to have a full appreciation of the ways in which, during the past quarter of a century, Open University and distance education system took deep roots in India, and the role of the principal agencies involved in that process. We have presented before you a full case study of IGNOU as a university in Unit 1, but that narrative would not have been complete without explaining the part played by DEC as a national coordinating agency for distance education in India. We have presented to you the efforts made by DEC, and, in particular, what it has been able to achieve. From our narrative, however, you will have noticed that the success of such initiatives also depends on the national policy environment, the legislative framework, the stakeholder interests, and not the least, the full cooperation of all the components that constitute the national education system. Having said that, and especially for the benefit of those who might be called upon to establish such national coordination systems in distance education in their own countries, we would make some concluding remarks here about the DEC experience in India. The National Policy on Education, 1986, made a strong statement on open university system. It said, the Open University system has been initiated in order to augment opportunities for higher education and as an instrument of democratizing education, IGNOU, established in 1985 in fulfillment of these objectives, will be strengthened. This powerful instrument will have to be developed with care and extended with caution. This statement, coming as it did after the IGNOU legislation came into force, did fully endorse the need for special attention to establish appropriate instrumentalities to promote the open university and distance education system in the country. The initial success of DEC owed as much to this policy support as to the approach used in giving effect to the roles and responsibilities assigned to it. It carefully went about promoting a partnership, engaging every partner as an equal participant in a joint endeavor in achieving common goals and objectives. When the focus shifted from partnership and networking to regulation and control, apparently due to the increase in the number of institutions and the involvement of some of them in gross irregularities and malpractices, some weaknesses in the structure of DEC itself began to surface. Its legal status as a regulator was questioned, its relationship with IGNOU in the context of its regulatory role came up for scrutiny. Talks about fresh legislation to clothe it with full legal support tended to weaken its authority and effectiveness. The delay in any new legislative measures further eroded its legal status and moral authority. It was not enough to offer policy support, it was equally important to review the initial phase and take appropriate measures to remove weaknesses, if any. After all, when it was initially conceived, the expectation was that the open university and distance education system would evolve its own norms and standard setting systems. But as the system grew, the complexities also multiplied. There was no review of the policy environment or proposal for new legislative measures with any sense of urgency. The DEC experience clearly establishes that all new initiatives, taken with good intentions, need to be closely monitored by policy makers to ensure that the environment in which those initiatives are taken is not weakened and, where necessary, corrective measures are taken to remedy shortcomings, if any. The assumption of the regulatory role without adequate preparation in the form of legal backing, and the insistence on the mandatory requirement of accreditation when it was only voluntary in the entire higher education system in the country was, perhaps, a case of DEC moving into an uncharted area too soon and too assertively. The important lesson to be learned from this experience is that however well-intentioned the distance education planners and managers may be, they need to take all stakeholders into confidence and create the environment that can support and sustain new initiatives. This, besides other imperatives, resulted in shifting of this regulatory function in 2012 from IGNOU to the University Grants Commission. 2.6.3 Some conclusions. We must make it clear at this stage that all the observations made in the preceding sections are not based on any official review or any particular research study or its findings. These observations, as we said earlier, are no value judgments. Nor are they designed to undermine the authority and the statutory responsibility assigned to DEC. Our purpose is no more than to provoke discussion and debate among planners and managers of distance education on different experiences in different situations and to add to the body of knowledge about policies and practices followed by very successful open university and distance education systems. These observations are based on information available in the public domain, and we have tried to place them in a perspective that would be useful to the learners of large distance education systems across the globe. 2.7 Role of UGC in regulation of ODLAND. Online learning. The Distance Education Council, DEC, had been in existence for more than 22 years, performing the duties relating to promotion, coordination and maintenance of standards in the ODL system, which includes providing financial assistance to distance education institutions and state open universities, devising policies and developing norms and benchmarks, promoting research, providing expertise in ODL pedagogy, providing training and capacity building to ODL functionaries. Include faculty, course writers and counselors of ODL institutions, and also evaluating universities and institutions for recognizing them to offer programs, through distance mode is presented in the above sections of this unit. However, the regulatory role of DEC was taken away and entrusted from IGNOU to UGC by the MHRD with which IGNOU was instructed to issue notification for repeal of Statute 28 of IGNOU Act and to take all necessary steps for smooth transition as envisaged in MHRD order, dated the 29th of December 2012, and the notification number IG/ADMN G DEC 2013-3057, dated 105.2013, issued by the Indira Gandhi National Open University, IGNOU, notifying the repeal of Statute 28 of IGNOU Act. UGC took over DEC on, as is where is basis consequent upon repeal of Statute 28 of IGNOU Act and dissolution of DEC of IGNOU. Through the UGC order, among others, it was decided that the entire setup of erstwhile DEC, including infrastructural facilities, shall be taken over by UGC with immediate effect. On as is where is basis. There was, however, no major change in the functioning of the open and distance education system except the change of guard. All the decisions of the erstwhile DEC were made applicable till such time the UGC brought the new open and distance learning regulations. The UGC Open and Distance Learning Regulations 2017 were notified in the Gazette ON the 23rd of June 2017. As per the regulations, all the higher education institutions intending to offer a program in open and distance learning mode immediately after the notification of these regulations and for subsequent years are made to submit online application in the format specified by the Commission and upload the same on the specified portal along with scanned copies of the documents specified therein, at least 6 months before the commencement of the academic session of the program intended to be offered by such higher educational institution. The bureau designated by UGC to deal with the open and distance learning institutions is called Distance Education Bureau, DEB. All the higher education institutions granted recognition by UGC are updated on the website of UGC. The final decision to grant recognition to an institution rests with the Commission. Every order granting or refusing recognition to higher educational institutions for programs in open and distance learning mode are communicated in writing for appropriate action to such higher educational institutions and to the concerned state government and the central government. Every higher educational institution, in respect of which recognition for programs has not been granted by the Commission, cannot continue the programs in open and distance learning mode. UGC issues notification from time to time regarding the monitoring of the study centers, territorial jurisdiction and other regulatory directives. The details about the lists of institutions recognized by UGC are available on UGC website www.ugc.ac.in/deb. The various amendments to UGC ODL regulations are also notified and made applicable on ODL institutions. Later to ODL UGC Regulations 2017, UGC came out with separate regulations to offer online programs by different higher education institutions in 2018, whose details are available on UGC website. We will not be discussing about the same here. 2.8 Let US Sum UP. In the previous unit you have read about IGNOU in details, yet not complete in terms of its functions and responsibilities. In this unit we dealt with the remaining part of the earlier unit, i.e. the promotion and coordination role given to IGNOU, very comprehensively and critically. The major issues covered in this unit are evolution of a new model for promotion, the establishment of DEC, and initiatives taken by DEC till 2012, and the impact of DEC on the DE system in the country. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.